Michelle Lott, my friend. Thank you.
Okay. So as our panel just talked about, it's getting increasingly difficult to bring novel devices to market, and we're going to explore some constraints within the MDR about why that is going to be even more of a problem moving forward. So today we're going to talk about state of the art versus standard of care, and is this more than just semantics? So the reason why it's important is that state of the art is at the heart of every bit of documentation you have to produce to get a CE mark. This was already the case under MDD, but it's even more so the case under MDR. It has to be the focus of the outcome of your technical documentation, of your risk management, risk analysis process. It has to be what the point and what you're trying to prove in your post-market surveillance and your clinical investigations. So we're going to explore the life cycle of state of the art, and we're going to start with what is existing state of the art. So if you were to Google just the term state of the art, what do you think that means, or what does it bring to mind for you, just the term itself?
The newest?
Exactly. Anybody else? Best practice? Innovative? Yep. Exactly. All of those are legitimate, most up-to-date features, result of modern methods, and it's the most sophisticated technology, art, or science available. So if you look at the continuum of the evolution of technology, just by the Google definition, if you will, we're kind of looking at, we're a little bit more on the end stage to the right of the evolutionary cycle. However, what says Mr. ISO 14971 2019 that was just released at the end of last year? For the first time in regulatory history, we have a formal definition of state of the art. And guess what? It is not. It is mentioned 15 times, but it is currently and generally accepted as good practice and technology in medicine. And the standard has a special note that this does not imply the most technologically advanced solution available. So right off the bat, we are kind of at odds with what people naturally and intuitively define as state of the art and how regulators define state of the art.
They had so many other choices for words.
Exactly. They could have we make up words as regulators all the time. They could have just made something else up that didn't already mean something to the most of the world. So, but with this new definition, now we have to reread 14971 in context of how they've defined state of the art. So in the pre-market phase, right in the introduction of the standard, they say as soon as you think of an idea for a medical device, you have to start considering the suitability of that device in context of state of the art. Then they define that as you have to think about newer revised standards with published and validated data, and alternative medical devices, and here's a little bit of a kicker, or other therapies available. Well, other therapies could include not only other devices, maybe surgical procedures, maybe pharmaceuticals. So then we move to what are the requirements in the post-market stage? Because the risk management standard requires you to think about state of the art throughout the product life cycle. Well, in post-market, you have to think of newer revised standards again. So if a standard has come to fruition since you brought your device to market, now you have to comply with this new standard. We already knew that. This next one is kind of interesting. You have to plan follow-up actions for your product based on state of the art that changed since you brought it to market. And this includes changes in state of the art for alternative devices, so any new products that have come to market, and any new therapies that are available on the market. So again, this is a public service announcement. Why are we talking about this? It's back to, this is state of the art is at the heart of everything. We just talked about how it's at the heart of risk analysis. So if we move on through the life cycle of state of the art, now we're going to talk about existing standard of care. So for that, again, using our new definition of state of the art, we're going to explore that definition of standard of care. So what does standard of care connotate to you, especially some of the physicians in the room?
Best practice?
Mm-hmm. Where's the doctors? This is supposed to be a highly interactive presentation here. Like, help me out. All right. Well, Google says that it's the appropriate treatment based on scientific evidence and collaboration between professionals. This is my personal favorite definition. What a minimally competent physician in the same field would do in the same situation with the same resources. And then we get to something a little bit more in the middle where you balance average prudent provider in any given community, how they would practice. Problem is, wherefore art thou, state of the art? I happen to own 60 acres of land in rural, deep south in the United States. A minimally competent physician has barely any resources and questionable competency, depending on what your problem is, where this land happens to be. I have a lot of friends in the Chicago area that have access to the most technologically advanced healthcare solutions. But I guarantee you, you could not take the physician with that education and those resources and drop them in the middle of rural Mississippi and that they have the same outcomes as the physician that's used to doing it with no resources. Well, one of our friends in the last panel just brought up the differences in adopting medical technology in Poland versus the rest of the EU, much less the rest of the United States. I have talked to packaging experts.
Hold on.
I just used Poland because
I'm really sorry for this.
they mentioned Poland in the last talk, so I was trying to show I was paying attention. So the packaging experts I've talked to have explained that human factors analysis in your packaging and sterile barrier testing is getting to be more and more scrutinized by notified bodies, and that the way that they open sterile barriers is different in the United States versus Europe. So if you haven't planned for what is the standard of care where you're at, you may be missing some major elements in your testing. Last not least, I saw on the news a few weeks ago that they were building a brand new hospital from scratch in China to treat all the coronavirus cases. What do you think the technology capabilities in a hospital that's gone from the dirt to fully functional operation, how much state of the art or standard of care is going to be embodied in that facility? So if we look at all of those two concepts in context of the MDR 2.7.1, which is the guidance for clinical evaluations. Now, this was out early in the 2017, I believe, time frame. So this has been out for a while, but the definition for state of the art is new. So let's look through there and see what it talks about. It does not formally define state of the art or standard of care, but it does talk about state of the art over 39 times. So this is a significant portion of the argument you have to make in your clinical evaluation. So, and again, forgive me for all the words in this presentation. This is really unlike me, but honestly, these are all the words in the standards and regulations we take for granted and lose the big picture context for.
Which is why you hire Michelle instead of having to read this shit yourself.
Exactly. This was about 500 pages of data that I dug through to find the important bits.
I have one question. I was concerning about that. For example, when you have a ISO, like you say, risk management, and it takes 1-2 years to have it fully approved, most of the time it comes as draft. Would you consider it as state of the art? And some companies say, okay, it's a draft. I'm not going to do anything. So I'm waiting for the revised one.
This is what I always say about standards and guidance documents that are in draft. That reflects the agency's or the standard organization's current state of thinking. So while technically maybe the notified bodies can't hold you to it, you better be prepared to make an argument that is beyond just, this is a draft so I don't have to comply. What have you done to move towards that, to go beyond the existing acknowledged state of the art, but maybe not be fully compliant with that new standard? There has to be some intelligent conversation around it besides just, I don't have to do it. You know, I've been told by my engineering teams before Michelle, you just tell the FDA that guidance document's a draft. And then, our submission's put on hold with AIs for things that they want that were in the draft guidance. So now we are in the clinical evaluation guidance document. The It talks about the current knowledge, state of the art in the corresponding medical field. They talk about the standards. They talk about benchmark devices, so you're responsible for knowing what your competitive products are. And they talk about, again, other medical devices and medical alternatives. So now we're back into exploring that other therapies. Well, you say, I'm a medical device company. What do I know about, alternative surgical practices that don't involve my device, or alternative pharmaceutical practices? You have an obligation here to understand that whole spectrum of care. You have to, again, I just want you to see the number of times they're talking about other devices and alternative therapies. What is alternative therapy starting to sound like? Standard of care. And now we're starting to use these other devices and alternative therapies to define not only state of the art, but to identify hazards in the product's use in alternatives. So now we're getting into state of the art, including clinical practice guidelines. So now this is beyond understanding the state of the art of the technological features of your device. So now we're talking about the importance of the literature review to inform you what are the current interventions and how have they changed since you brought your product to market. State of the art in assessment of acceptable benefit risk profiles. So now your clinical evaluation is getting tied directly into your risk analysis. And so again, Monette, what if some of this stuff is in draft, but it's in draft because the state of the art in the clinical practice is changing? So these are all things that you have to think about together. Did you have a question, or did I?
Actually, regarding that point, it's a moving target, right? Since it takes so long to bring something to market, it's a moving target. By the time you're going midway through all of what you have to do to bring a medical device to market, the medical field might have changed completely. Yes, an example of that is all the devices to remove blood clots in case of strokes. I mean, it changed the entire medical procedures overnight, and anybody who was working still on drugs had to basically change, and everything got changed overnight. So there's a significant risk in itself just because of the definition.
Exactly, and for those of you who have raised multi-million dollars or more in funding, your cheese could move, basically, in these alternative therapies and procedures. So, again, we're using the state of the art to define that benefits and risks are acceptable when compared to the current state of the art. And so, again, back to our public service announcement about why are we talking about this anyways. This is, again, at the heart of everything you have to prove. So now we have tied state of the art clearly into your risk analysis process and into your clinical documentation, which is now kind of a circular loop of these two processes are feeding each other.
Could I get a show of hands? And I mean, Michelle, no offense at all. How many of you at some point in this presentation thought, what is she talking about? And how will I remember this? And that sounds hard, and I should just let her do it. Could I have a show of hands of anyone who's had any of those thoughts in the last 20 minutes? Because I'm like, you lost me at state of the art. And you just kept going on and on.
And I'm only half done.
Okay, well, you get the idea. It's just, and what's also just compounding it further is as you help us understand what these terms mean, I have to think that even the best intentioned, most studied FDA student trying to do his or her job is also interpreting what this means. So you were lucky and you got David instead of Lars, and that's the way he interpreted it in your favor, but the other guy didn't, so sorry.
Well, interpretation is a super big thing in the MDR right now. And this is not meant to be offensive at all, and I was told this by Basil Akra from TÜV-SÜD, so not me. Don't throw anything.
Let us have it.
Yep. So he said that the MDR was written primarily in English, although it is translated into all the other languages, by people who don't natively speak English, and they translate it into different things into their native language, so those words mean slightly different things across this whole spectrum of languages in the European Union. And he said that during their competent authority audit for their designation, that after their designation audit, that they didn't even know how many corrective actions that they were going to have to take, because the competent authorities were arguing about the interpretation of the MDR and what it meant to each of them. So to the point that they didn't even agree that two sued should have the same audit findings. So if that's happening at a level 2 up from us, what do you think the conversations are going to be like? The hundreds and thousands of conversations are going to be like between industry across the entire world and the notified bodies. And I have also been advised by notified bodies based in Europe that if you don't already have a notified body, you need to pick one that you are in a country where the competent authority, where you're comfortable communicating in the language of the competent authority in that country, not necessarily the notified body, because you're going to have difficult conversations all the way up the food chain. So, okay.
Job security, much?
Yeah. So let's look at what the MDR says in context of what we now understand about state of the art and standard of care. So the MDR introduced 70 new definitions over the MDD, but it did not define state of the art or standard of care in any of those 70 definitions. But they did talk about state of the art 11 times. And again, they talked about it throughout every bit of the technical documentation in the life cycle. So what does the MDR say? Well, they start in the general safety and performance, which most everybody understands is the technical performance requirements checklist in, I believe it's Annex 1. It is. Good for me. I have my reference in there. So they talk about, from the point you design the device, right at concept development, it needs to be suitable for its intended purpose, as that intended purpose is defined by currently acknowledged state of the art, and it should constitute acceptable risks in that context. So again, even MDR is circling all this back together. We're bringing in risk control measures again. We're developing risk control measures to develop safety principles, and state of the art is dictating what those risk control measures need to be. So in terms of clinical evaluation and PMCF, look at how our terms are starting to shift in the way state of the art is used. So now we have to continuously conduct a clinical evaluation to see what is the state of the art in medicine, and then again feed that back into the acceptability of our risk benefit. What does state of the art in medicine mean? It sounds suspiciously like standard of care. So still in clinical evaluations, we're talking about clinical state of the art in clinical care. We're talking about state of the art in clinical practice. We're talking about risks and clinical benefits. So we're back into our risk analysis loop. And the clinical relevance in accordance with clinical state of the art, not product technology state of the art. So what has happened to our concepts of state of the art and standard of care? These have gotten to be interchangeable context. So now every time you read the term state of the art in a regulatory document, you have to turn your brain on and say, what is this modifying? Is it modifying my product technology, or is it modifying clinical practice, clinical state of the art? So to your point, where does this mean that state of the art in medical technology is on the evolutionary spectrum? We're really not here at the end. You're really kind of shooting for something a little bit more, between those middle two guys. And there is a number of reasons for that. But first off, you see how long it takes to come to the market. To bring something like this to the market, it's going to take a really long time, and your cheese might have moved by then. But secondly, the cost to bring something like this and to get a payer to pay for it is like getting them to oftentimes pay for a Ferrari when they could have been treated with whatever your version of Chevrolet is here. So again, at the heart of the argument, MDR brings all the things, that's a saying that we have in the United States, it's just all the things under state of the art into one context. So how do you establish new state of the art? You're going to have to go through an expert panel review if it's a class 3, some 2Bs. That's a lot of times with the actual competent authority. Again, pick one where you're comfortable communicating in their language. They are going to generate common specification documents, and then a common specification document is like, I guess it's going to be the granddaddy of a standard. Nobody knows yet because they were supposed to release all of the common specifications by May 26 of 2020, and they have released no common specification documents, and you were supposed to have 6 months to comply with them when they came out. So are we there yet? Yes, now we are finally there. We have gone through this life cycle of state of the art, and we have finally brought new state of the art to market. But what has happened at the end of this cycle is that this new state of the art that we jumped through all these hoops to prove our risk benefit profile and how it fit into clinical practice now becomes existing state of the art, and we start the process all over again to bring true state of the art technology to market. Again, you care because this is at the heart of the argument. For every piece of documentation, you have to show a notified body to get a CE mark under MDR. Comments, questions, shock and awe. Also, I'm a grief counselor if anybody needs to make an appointment later.
Alistair, hold on.
What are the chances of getting this repealed? It's killing innovation, and it will kill innovation. I hear of certain large medtech companies taking thousands of products off the market because it just doesn't pay for them to go through MDR. I mean, this is a sad situation for healthcare. It really is. It's overregulated.
It really is, and I see a lot of mid-sized and small companies not making any effort at all because they are putting all their eggs in the basket that this just can't be real. Europe's gonna take this back. But we have to think about over 27 countries worked together for 10 years to draft this. So the likelihood of them all agreeing to repeal something that they worked 10 years and finally agreed on is extremely unlikely.
Michelle, first of all, thank you so much for your presentation. I believe it brings a lot of clarity. So for especially these who are not really connected with regulatory. But one thing which I would like to ask you as a question for these who work in medical devices. Is there any word of encouragement you will say? Because this is what, just one of the questions. It kills innovation. It brings Europe to really lose the race in the bringing new technologies and new therapies on the market. So seeing all that, that's really a little bit a tricky thing. I would say that if a startup starts about thinking to, bring something to market and so on, they don't have to think about salespeople. They need to hire regulatory after the CEO. So what is your comment about this?
Exactly. Well, the encouraging thing is if you have a leadership team that is savvy enough to realize these dynamics. As Drew was talking about earlier, like you said, marketing and sales can't be the first strategy anymore. That all has to be tied into your regulatory plan. So if you've got a leadership team that has got their heads out of the sand and are not operating in typical business fashion where they treat regulatory as a necessary evil, you've got a chance of navigating this process. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I guess I think more simply about it because when I think about standard of care, I think about what the technical guidance says. Those evolved. The old Foley guidance has been replaced by a new one. When I'm thinking of state of the art, I'm thinking about my predicate device. Here's a device that's on the market that's achieved a certain benefit risk ratio. As long as I can show I've got more benefit at less risk, I can argue being state of the art. Why can't I bracket between those two poles?
Those are all arguments that you have to factor in and make both sides of that argument in both your clinical evaluation and your risk analysis. And for you, like antimicrobial coatings, there are antimicrobial coatings out there. What makes you similar and different? And then why are your differences not presenting any new questions of safety and efficacy? That's my state of the art. Right.
Anyone who follows me online knows that Michelle and I belong to a mutual admiration society, but I stopped paying attention like 15 minutes ago. It's just too much. It really is. And so during lunch, the line will form at the far corner for those of you who need grief counseling or consultation from Michelle. Please put your hands together for Michelle Lott, my friend.